So I'll be discussing Maryam alayhi salam and particular aspects of her journey and some of the lessons that we can derive from her life. So all themes that are explored in the Quran are important. And this year we have a particularly beautiful theme, the theme of dua, communicating with Allah. And it could be argued that this is the most important theme to explore in the Quran. If we understand that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala places in us human faculties and human needs, and one specific human need that he places in us is this need to communicate, this need to be able to express one another, ourselves to one another and relate to one another and communicate with one another. And I think that, in a time like this, in a pandemic, amidst a lockdown, we're realizing this more than ever, that, the phone calls that we're used to having and the meetings and our mundane conversations and interactions are much dearer to us than we perhaps realized. This need to communicate is something that we depend upon, and it's how we establish our strong relationships with each other. So with this in mind, if we take our purpose of our existence in this dunya to be to establish our relationship with Allah, if our sole reason for being a ruh, having a physical experience in this realm, is to relate to Allah, then surely it is of the utmost importance that we understand what dua is, how to communicate with Allah, how to make dua, how to, how did the people of greatness in our tradition, in our faith, how did they make this dua? And what lessons can we take from this? So far in the series, we've seen Rasuls and Nabis, and we've explored how they talk to Allah. We've seen how these prophetic du'as were called out in a moment of struggle, in a moment of difficulty, and what Allah then did for them in response to that du'a, and how that communication worked and how that strengthened their characters. But what's particularly exceptional about this particular episode is that we're not looking at a conversation that a prophet had. We're exploring the interactions of a woman, and that's a rare case in the series. But this is not just any woman in history. This is one of the most exalted women in human history, Maryam alayhi salam. And it's important to note why Maryam alayhi salam is so special. Her mother, Hannah, may Allah be pleased with her, we learn in Surah Al-Imran that she prayed for a boy so that she could offer him up in service to Allah, so that her son could be a worshipper of Allah and spend his life in prayer and in worship of him. But then, of course, when she finally has her child, she says to Allah, "I've delivered a girl." And of course, Allah says, "I'm well aware of that, and the female is not like the male." And there is a plan that Allah refers to in this moment. But little did they realize in this moment, these servants of Allah making dua for a certain child, for a certain life, that not only would their daughter go on to be one of the best of womankind, one of the best women to be created, but would also serve as a vessel for one of the greatest prophets of all time, Isa alayhi salam. So Maryam alayhi salam had to be a woman. No man could have done this mighty job, and there is a wisdom and a hikmah in what Allah had ordained beyond what could be seen in that moment by these servants of Allah making dua. And it is in this that we see a great lesson in accepting and submitting to Allah's will and Allah's plan. And at times, we make dua for things that we believe to be the best for us, but only Allah truly knows what that is. And so from the perspective of praying for noble lineage, they have a daughter who is, one of the best women in history. And then from that also a grandson who follows, who is a prophet, alayhi salam. So indeed, the dua for progeny that serves Allah was fully answered. And it's interesting to note that Maryam alayhi salam, unlike in the Bible, where Mary is solely, the mother of Jesus or Isa alayhi salam, her sole function is to be that mother. In the Quran, this is not the case. Maryam alayhi salam is referred to as Maryam, daughter of Imran, and is highly regarded as an exemplary believer in her own right. So she's a worshipper of Allah that we can see as an example, and in her own right, someone who we can draw lessons from. And it's also noteworthy to mention that she's the only woman to be mentioned by name in the Quran and is referred to no less than 70 times. And it is in this way that Allah honors her. And she is honored and she is revered as an example of purity, of decency, of modesty, of dignity, of piety, and of obedience. And she is an example for women and for men. In the exact same way that Yusuf alayhi salam, in all these regards, was an example for men and for women in decency. Equally, Maryam alayhi salam is an example for women and for men in all these aspects. So just to look a little at the structure of Surah Maryam and understand what it entails before we go into Maryam alayhi salam's story specifically. So these are sort of categories you could split the surah up into. And the first portion of it includes Zakaria alayhi salam's sort of story, aspect to his story. So he's given news of a son. He will be granted a son. Allah reveals to him that he's going to have a son, Yahya alayhi salam. And Zakaria alayhi salam is taken aback by this. And he says, you know, I'm in my old age. My wife is barren. How is this even possible? And as a sign, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commands him to remain silent for a few days. And then later, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions that Yahya alayhi salam will be his son, he says that peace will be upon him on the day he was born and on the day that he dies. And then we move into the story of Maryam alayhi salam, and there's this very interesting parallel that we see between Zakaria alayhi salam and Maryam alayhi salam. In one instance, we have Zakaria alayhi salam who's you know, wanting a child, but for the longest time of his life was not given one, was not granted one, and it was only in his old age that he's granted a son. And in Maryam alayhi salam's instance, you know, she's young, she's far from, you know, she's not married, and she ends up being given a child in an unwanted motherhood, you know, something she'd never expected. So there's this very interesting juxtapositioning of these two stories and these two takes. And also, in similarly to the advice given to Zakaria alayhi salam, when Maryam alayhi salam gives birth to Isa alayhi salam, she's also told to remain silent. And then Isa alayhi salam speaks from the cradle, and he also says, peace will be upon me, is upon me on the day that I'm born, and on the day that I die, and on the day that I'm raised again. So you see these very interesting parallels in this surah. It's a very rich surah. And then the surah then goes on to talk about Ibrahim alayhi salam's call to his father, to Tawheed, to the oneness of Allah, and to abandon worshipping idols. And then we see, you know, the call of the prophets also to their respective people. And then there is a call that Jibreel alayhi salam makes to worship Allah. And Jibreel alayhi salam actually plays quite a fundamental role in this surah, you know, in the story of Maryam alayhi salam. And then later, you know, there's a sort of proclaim that he makes as well about worshipping Allah. And then we have couplings of Allah questioning the disbelievers and asking rhetorical questions and speaking of their fate. And then at the end of the surah, there's a sort of concluding reminder on the guidance that the Quran presents and outcomes for our deeds in this dunya, in our akhirah. So in the story of Maryam alayhi salam, detailed in this surah, we learn that first, after spending her life in prayer and in worship, she is approached one day by Jibreel alayhi salam in the form of a man, which of course initially shocks her, and she seeks refuge in Allah from this person. But eventually Jibreel alayhi salam reveals that he is a messenger from Allah, and he informs her of the child she is about to carry, who will be righteous and a pure man. Now, of course, this is something that Maryam alayhi salam disputes, you know, being unmarried. And then Jibreel alayhi salam says, thus it will be. Your Lord says, it is easy for me, and we will make him a sign to the people and a mercy from us, and it is a matter already decreed. So Allah shows us this is very easy for him to do. And in the exact same way that he responded to Zakaria alayhi salam earlier in the surah, saying that this is, you know, easy for Allah to do, to grant him Yahya alayhi salam, in the exact same way Allah shows his might in this instance and says, this is easy for me, you know, life comes from me, death comes from me, everything comes from me. And this miracle will take place whether it makes physical sense or not. And then we come into these ayat, which I've put up here, that hopefully you should be able to see. So she conceived him, and she withdrew with him to a remote place, and the pains of childbirth drove her to the trunk of a palm tree. She said, oh, I wish I had died before this and was in oblivion, forgotten. But he called her from below her. Do not grieve, your Lord has provided beneath you a stream, and shake toward you the trunk of the palm tree. It will drop upon you ripe, fresh dates. So eat, drink, be glad, and say to anyone you may see, I have vowed to the most merciful a fast, so I will not speak to any man. In the first two ayat that you see here, we get a real sense for the anguish and the shame and the fear that Maryam alayhi salam is feeling. Someone who's renowned for her purity and her piety is struggling and suffering with this ordeal that will seek to destroy her reputation and her respect and her decency amongst a practicing people. But also, bear in mind, she's going into labor. Childbirth is probably one of the most painful natural human processes. And it is through this insurmountable pain that Allah has fashioned us to continue the human race. Now, imagine a young woman entirely alone in complete isolation, scared out of her mind, petrified not only of the process that she's physically going through, but also very acutely aware of the spiritual, social, and moral consequences that it carries with regards to her reputation, her dignity, the way she'll be treated, and her concern over her moral reality. And then in that moment, this voice, then calls to her. And so, she's exclaiming that, I wish I'd been forgotten. I wish I'd never even existed, into oblivion. And then this voice calls to her. And there's difference of opinion amongst the Mufassirun about who this voice and who these words actually belong to. Many say that it's Jibreel alayhi salam, but some do say that it could potentially be Isa alayhi salam. There is overwhelming statement that is likely Jibreel alayhi salam. So with that in mind, this would make this the second occasion that Jibreel alayhi salam comes to Maryam alayhi salam. And Jibreel alayhi salam is someone who, he's the first of creation. He's witnessed monumental occurrences in human history. He was there to declare the start of this pregnancy, and he arrives to give news of relief at the end. He gives her words of relief at the beginning and now at the end. And of course, whose words are ultimately do these belong to? They belong to Allah, of course. So he mentions that there's a stream at your feet. And there's this very interesting parallel you can see here between this miraculous stream and Zamzam, which also sprung from the ground in a time of need shared by a mother and her child. But if we think a little bit more about this provision that's made for her, I actually looked up yesterday how tall on average date palms are, and on average they're about 23 meters high, but obviously you can have some shorter ones too. But it doesn't really seem like it's the sort of thing you just shake lightly and then dates just casually fly down from the tree. I saw some videos yesterday actually. Usually people climb up the tree and then they bring the dates down or they cut them off or whatever. But it's not known to us how accessible these were. But subhanAllah, you do get a feel for how easy Allah made this for her. That the dates were right there, and just by chance she'd clung to the date palm and she had provision there readily available for her. And it's really, really incredible to see that this is not actually something that's new for Maryam alayhi salam. All her life, she's been provided with provisions from her Lord. Allah tells us in Surah Imran that when she was under the care of Zakaria alayhi salam, and when he would come to check on her, she already has, all these provisions. He'd find her with food and with whatnot. So she was already cared for. And so we get this insight into this very special relationship that she shares with Allah. In the same way that like a loving parent provides through Allah's means food for their child, Allah directly provides for Maryam alayhi salam, in this very kind of loving way, and this sheds light on Allah's rahmah and His mercy and protection over her. But not only that, in her moment of grief, where she felt completely alone, Allah grants her ease once again by giving her, water and dates. And I think this in itself is an underrated miracle of sorts. Everything about this birth, from the conception to the pregnancy to the child that is born, is a miracle, and this part of the process is no exception. It's not like you go into labor and you're feeling this serious pain, and the only thing that comes to mind is suddenly, oh, I'd really love a burger, or you're suddenly really ravenous or whatever. That's not quite what happens. Like, that's not a key priority on your mind if you're feeling the pains of labor. But obviously she's going through a lengthy process, and the time that she'll spend there is not mentioned in the Quran. but of course she'll need some sustenance and water. But more than anything, these ayat give her great comfort and ease, because this is Allah providing for her. This is an expression, these words have been revealed to her as an expression of Allah providing for her in her lowest moment, in the very pinnacle of her struggle, where she feels alone and panicked and scared of how people will react, and perhaps, abandoned, and then obviously in this, incredible physical pain. And anyone who's tasted the sweetness of Iman, anyone who knows, what it feels to have that faith and have that closeness to Allah, knows what it feels like to be panicked when when you feel like maybe your faith is shaking a little bit, maybe your Iman is sort of wavering a little bit, or maybe you're in an instance where you've made an error and you're panicked, you're worried that, my Lord, don't forsake me, you may have lost his favor. And that's really, really petrifying for a believing heart. Nothing is more petrifying for a believing heart than missing out on the favor of your Lord. And in this instance, Maryam alayhi salam, she hasn't even done anything wrong. May Allah send peace upon her. But she can't fathom a life or an existence where she's not in the favor or obedience of her Lord, or safe from the shame and humiliation of a practicing people. And this is why she says that she wants to be cast into oblivion. There's this really interesting parallel here you can make between her and the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam in Surah Duha, where he says, where Allah revealed to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam that your Lord has not forsaken you and is not displeased with you. And then the next ayat speak about how surely the akhirah is better for you than this world, and did he not find you an orphan and give you shelter, so on and so forth. So we'll learn more about this in tomorrow's episode. But in this exact same manner, similarly to this manner, this is effectively what is being communicated to Maryam alayhi salam in these ayat. So in that exact same way, when she was alone and he provided for her in her youth, all those times that he provided for her before, these words are giving Maryam alayhi salam comfort by saying, Allah is still here, he is still here, and he is still providing for her, and he has not forsaken her in the height of her struggle, in the height of her anguish and her despair. Allah is providing for her just like he used to. And this is the ease in these words. This ayah is not simply about the physical food and drink she has acquired, but much, much more than that. They reflect on the wider protection and provision of her Lord upon her. And that was the promise that Allah made to Maryam alayhi salam. And it's not a promise made to her in isolation. This is a promise that Allah makes to all believers, to all believing hearts, to all repentant hearts, that when we call upon him, he will answer, inshallah. It's with this comfort that she is then able to move past the pain and place the tawakkul in Allah's plan. Allah says to her, in this last portion, he says, she's told, if you see anybody, say, I have vowed to the most merciful a fast, so I will not speak to any man. It's by her being comforted by these ayat and then being able to move past this pain that she can place her tawakkul in Allah's plan, to trust in Allah and his great hikmah. Even when he asks something that cannot really be understood, why would she not speak? She later then, points to the child, and Isa alayhi salam speaks, but that doesn't actually make any sense, before that that's going to happen. But think about this for a minute. Imagine being so close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that you're conspiring with him in a plan. You're involved with Allah in a plan. It's like, for example, when you're discussing with a friend about some sort of obstacle that you need to navigate through, or you've got a business partner and you're dealing with some sort of challenge or something, and then you say to them, oh, okay, when this happens, you say this, and then I'm going to do that, and so on and so forth. You've got a game plan. What's fascinating about this is you get a real feel for the closeness of their relationship. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying to her, okay, you do this, and then I'm going to do this bit. So Maryam alayhi salam is following a plan from Allah. And what could possibly bring her in her current situation more comfort or ease than a divine game plan? And so this is Allah saying, okay, here's your food and drink for now. I'm still here with you. And later is taken care of too. There's a plan in place. And that is a plan that will always be successful, subhanAllah. But really, it's mind-blowing to just think about this sort of relationship that Maryam alayhi salam has established with her Lord through her years of prayer and worship. And from that, we see that it's important to note, Allah doesn't just give nobility to a person. Like, for example, a lot of our prophets, they have noble lineage and so on and so forth, but it's not like they don't do anything thereafter other than just being born into noble lineage. In Surah Al-Imran, we learned that Maryam alayhi salam was commanded to stand in prayer and worship. So it's through her acts of worship, it's through her dhikr, it's through her remembrance of Allah that she attains this higher station and that she develops this beautiful relationship with Allah. And this should be a lesson to all of us, that in that same way we can attain closeness to Allah. We cannot use not being the daughter or son of XYZ prophet as a reason to not push ourselves. We too can achieve some level of closeness with Allah. And Allah does not ever burden a soul more than they can bear. And what exactly does that mean? Allah does not put you through a trial without providing you with the equipment or the tools to deal with it. And so in that exact same way with Maryam alayhi salam, she was then given the tools and the equipment to deal with her ordeal. And so she places her tawakkul in Allah, she places her trust in his hikmah, and his plan, and is no longer fearful. But just imagine for a second that someone comes up to you and starts accusing you of the sickest, most lowly act you can think of. The one thing that is so beneath you that you actually built your entire reputation on being the exact opposite of that sort of person. Maryam alayhi salam I'm speaking about. People are going to come up to her and they're going to say all sorts of things to her in the village, and you don't respond. You don't clear your name. You don't bother even responding. That's the tawakkul that she has placed in Allah as she goes into the village carrying Isa alayhi salam, saying that she's not going to speak to any man. And the Prophet ﷺ has told us in many narrations as well that if someone picks a fight with you, you remain silent or you diffuse the situation. You don't feed shaitan. You don't feed the anger. You don't feed the gossip. And this is no easy task, particularly for such righteous people, because even the Prophet ﷺ was renowned for. He was renowned for being honest. He was renowned for being trustworthy. His nickname was Al-Amin amongst the people, before revelation. And then once revelation came to him, once he became a prophet, people called him Majnoon, they called him liar, they called him things that were the complete opposite of what his reputation had spoken for him. And, of course that stung. He was human, of course that stung, but he trusted in Allah. He put his faith in Allah's hikmah, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And then, we see in this that often Allah tests you in the manner and in the aspects that you value most. The aspects that make up your identity most significantly, the things you pride yourself on most, when tested in those aspects, that will resonate with you most. And Allah says in the Quran, you think you'll say a certain thing or you'll do a certain thing, and I will not test you. So Maryam alayhi salam, she returns to this village with her child. And in this, again, we see another important lesson, beyond placing her trust in Allah, beyond, her sincerity towards Allah, beyond her realization that Allah has not forsaken us, we also see another lesson. And it is that, don't place your moral validation in the hands of society. Because if you give society that kind of power, then you're also giving them the power to lead you astray. So society is not a standard. They're not the standard keepers. They're not the people you're aiming to please here. For example, if today being truthful is praised, tomorrow being scheming or knowing how to lie well or being crafty or whatever, that might be praised. And if that stream is where you set up your avenue for validation and for praise, then wherever the stream goes, you'll go with it, because it's a human need for you to continue to need to receive that validation and that praise. And remember that very little good comes from expending energy in maintaining some sort of socially revered facade. Maryam alayhi salam, she didn't spend her life in worship because people were praising her and applauding her. And she felt, okay, I need to keep this up because, I want to keep this pretense going or whatever. She had that ikhlas, she had that purity, that sincerity about her actions. She was sincere to her Lord, and that's why she was able to develop such a beautiful relationship with her Lord. And so, yeah, the very important lesson here is it's very easy for us in our day and age, with the help of social media, to want to maintain a social standing of some sort. I'm an intellectual, or I'm known for being really pious, or I'm a BNOC, a big name on campus. But it's next to impossible for the seeds of pride to not seep into your heart. It takes some real brutal honesty for you to be clear with yourself on what your intentions are. Are you truly doing something for the sake of Allah, for pleasing Allah? Or are you doing it because you know that this is going to keep giving you some sort of praise or some sort of applause? And personally, I've been very fortunate to see in many of my teachers and shuyukh the example of humility, which is very difficult if you think about it. Once you become a scholar, it's commendable to maintain humility, because so many people come to you with praise and they make dua for you, and they're following your guidance, and you essentially you acquire a great deal of power. But one of my teachers in particular, he's an internationally renowned scholar, mashallah, and to this day, he cringes at the thought of someone giving him an introduction at a talk, or he cringes at the thought of his face being put on posters. And you might say, okay, well, I mean, all of those things are very necessary and so on and so forth, but why is there this excessive need to keep so far from praise, excessive praise? And it's because people of knowledge understand how easy it is for us to become tempted by praise and to be robbed of our sincerity from Allah. So, we see Maryam alayhi salam, she did not maintain herself in a goodly manner for the people. And ultimately, she was able to maintain silence in the village and point to her child and execute Allah's plan, because she had always been sincere to Allah. It was never for the people. She was able to do this because it had never been about the people. Who she was had never been about the people. It had always been about Allah. And so this ordeal only served to further strengthen her relationship with Allah, her beloved guardian and provider and protector, and ultimately bring about a greater good for the world through his plan. And of course, her social regard, sorry, my throat is really drying up. Her social regard being so notable, that was also part of the plan. Obviously, it made her test much harder, being this person of such high repute, but obviously it was necessary because, had we had any doubts about her character, would the true miracle of Isa alayhi salam's birth be as lofty and as impactful? SubhanAllah. Okay. Oh, sorry. In case anyone's wondering why I put up a picture of a shepherd, it's because every prophet at some point in their life, as you probably know, was a shepherd. And, many great people have spoken about how nothing teaches you wisdom and patience and tawakkul in Allah's plan like managing a flock or a herd, which I think is a really beautiful concept. Okay, so this leads me on to my last point. I was asked to speak a little bit about mental health, and just as a disclaimer, I'm no mental health expert, but the lessons that we take from Maryam alayhi salam about tawakkul, about trusting Allah and his great hikmah, about patience, and about relying on his plan relate significantly to this topic. For Muslims, I think there's a lot that we can take from this. It's through the burdens that Maryam alayhi salam endured that she was raised above all other women in her time, and to be the sole woman timelessly named in the Quran, that's a great honor, and to have her character strengthened in a way that she could not have imagined. And it's if we think about all of the characters, all of the prophets that we've explored in this series so far, all of the people in the Quran that we learn about as tales, and we follow their stories through, their characters are tested and strengthened, and ultimately they rejoice with even greater fervor than they ever could have, had things just been given to them. It is through that struggle that they were purified and that their character was strengthened in some meaningful way. And if you think about it, your life would feel rather unfulfilling if you always got everything you wanted. You never have to put any effort in. Things are just handed to you on a silver platter without having to try hard. And ultimately, you wouldn't really get the full taste of sweetness of Iman and closeness to Allah if you didn't have to put in some effort towards achieving that. And this is what, you know, the examples of dua and of the prophets and the women of righteousness in the Quran is all about. They're examples of people who've been strengthened through struggle and have come out of it better off. And it's in this exact way that we should approach our lives and our personal hardships and tests. You know, we're all studying or working towards difficult jobs or whatever. And we all know what it's like to struggle and strive for a goal we desperately want to achieve. And in those instances, when we eventually, by the will of Allah, we do succeed, that is so much more, you know, meaningful. That's so much more of a greater achievement for us. It's like sometimes you have those exams that are really, really easy, and like you get like 90% or 100% in them. But then, you know, there's this other subject that's very difficult. You've always found it very challenging. You have to expend a lot of energy in it, and you really, really, really graft hard to get yourself a decent grade. And then finally, when you do get a decent grade, it might not be the highest grade you've ever gotten. You feel really proud of yourself. You feel really fulfilled. You feel like you know, you put in a lot of effort and you saw the fruit of that effort. And I think it's human nature for us to want things to go that way. We value things that we have put in effort for. And you know, inshallah, even if in that exam, the example that I gave, just to follow that through, you don't get the highest grade in that particular thing you put a lot of effort into, inshallah, Allah will reward you more for that than for the exam you barely tried in and got, you know, 100% in. So this is what the sweetness of sabr and taqwa will reap us, inshallah. This is how the measure of our souls will be made, by how much we struggled and by how much we use these struggles to strengthen our character and become closer to Allah. And it is in this beautifully rich and poetic manner that Allah makes examples of people for themselves and for others. And it is in this way that our personal strivings for better character in this dunya are given purpose and significance and weighting. And this is how, through the Quran, through the people mentioned in the Quran, Allah teaches us. So on mental health, there's many reasons people can suffer from poor mental health. And there are narrations of the Prophet ﷺ in the year of grief. He lost family members, he missed loved ones, he suffered. And it's important to realize that this is something that is an aspect of being human. Feeling these emotions are a part of being human, and you should allow yourself the time and the space to feel certain emotions that Allah has made you capable of feeling. But in the exact same way that you tackle any problem or issue or illness that you suffer from in your life by turning to Allah, maintaining your mental health is no different. In fact, it goes hand in hand pretty much with spiritual health. And as Muslims, nothing is more beloved to us than our iman. Nothing is sweeter to us than our faith in Allah, than our iman, than our dedication and our devotion to Allah and His purpose for us. And so any believer who's tasted the sweetness of iman knows how panicked you feel. We spoke about this earlier, knows how panicked you can feel at the thought of losing your iman. And it's in moments like that where the trouble comes in. This is when shaitan or iblis, which comes from the word ablasa, meaning he who despaired. This is when shaitan comes into the picture. And what did he despair from? He despaired from the mercy of Allah. So that's what he wants for us too. He wants us to go down with him, so to speak. But we do not despair from the mercy of Allah. Believers do not despair from the mercy of Allah. No matter how much we fail, no matter how low we feel, we never despair from the mercy of Allah. And how do we make the shayateen despair in us? We do that by fortifying ourselves with our dhikr and our remembrance of Allah. And this comes from increasing the khushu in your salah, praying on time, doing your daily adhkar, which is so important, your fortification. This is how you keep your mind and your heart and your souls healthy and hopeful, inshallah. And do not let there ever be any voids or any gaps in your aura for shaitan to be able to reach you or whisper to you. And how do you do this? Again, you do this by filling your heart with the remembrance and dhikr and gratitude and love for Allah and hope for His mercy, hope that there will be a better outcome, inshallah. And maybe you don't have that hikmah hasn't been made plain to you at this moment in time. And maybe it won't be made plain to you in this dunya, in this realm, but ultimately there is a plan, there is a hikmah, there is a wisdom behind this. So you should try to coat your thoughts and your actions with this in mind. With generosity, with kindness, and obviously do all the things that Muslims are advised to do. But more than anything, especially in times of difficulty. So yeah, so here are a few words of caution, a few practical things to strengthen your spiritual state and also your mental state. And it's so important, in these days, because we're all confined to our houses, and we're all struggling a little bit. So sorry, my computer's decided to restart. Yeah, it's gone. Okay. So this is the way in which we can, fortify ourselves. We pray our salah on time, we do our adhkar, and we increase ourselves in, our remembrance of Allah and our dhikr, and we keep good company. And this will, inshallah, improve our situation. And one important thing to note about salah is that every time you pray, every time you recite Al-Fatiha, or anything you say in your prayer, sorry, really losing my voice here, is that you bear in mind that when you recite Al-Fatiha, you're making a dua for yourself. When you say Ihdina as-sirat al-mustaqim, you're saying, guide us to the straight path. This has to be something that you say with every fiber of your being. This is something that should come from the heart. Every single time you recite that, every single time you recite anything in your salah, you should be saying it as a plea to Allah that, Ya Allah, keep us on the straight path, keep us in your favor, do not forsake us, keep providing for us and protecting for us as you did for Maryam alayhi salam. These should be your thoughts in mind. Now I'll leave there. I just wanted to end on a short dua that, we saw that Maryam alayhi salam, from her story, we learned about her sincerity towards her Lord, her worship that she did, and her disregard for the wrong things, and her regard for the correct things, like pleasing Allah. We saw this in the example of the prophets in the previous series as well. May Allah make us sincere in our worship of Him. May Allah protect us and fortify us and allow us to make our remembrance in Him continually, and allow it to affect and impact us in our hearts and our minds spiritually. And may He make it easy for us to trust Him, to trust in His plan, to trust in His great hikmah. And just quickly, wanted to make a quick dua as well for all of those who, all of those of you who've lost anyone in this really, really troubling time. I pray Allah grants them Jannah. I pray Allah grants you sabr and patience and ease. And all of you who are ill or suffering in any way, may Allah expiate your sins and grant you shifa. And some of you still got exams. I feel really bad for you guys. May Allah grant you success, and may we really benefit from this Ramadan, from the days that remain. May Allah forgive us if we fell short in any of our worship previously, but in the days that remain, may Allah reward us, and may we be rewarded for seeking Laylatul Qadr as well. With that, I'll leave it there. Jazakumullah khair. Al-Fatiha. Ameen.